Hi everyone, it is a great pleasure to be here today. My name is Meng-Chow Kang. I'm an adjunct associate professor with the Nanyang Technological University of Singapore. And at the same time, I run my own consulting firm known as Veritas Private Limited, right, specializing in cybersecurity and privacy-related strategy, development, and implementation. So today's topic is based on a study that I have conducted recently, right, evaluating the data protection requirements in a few countries in the region, including Singapore and Thailand, against the EU General Data Protection Regulations, the OECD Guidelines for Privacy and Security, and the APEC Privacy Framework. The paper is resulting from the study. The paper resulting from the studies will be published in due course. The focus of this presentation is on the key areas of protection identified across these various regulations and privacy principles, and the technical controls applicable for deployment in the cloud itself. Right. The purpose of this work is really to help IT systems architects, risk managers, data protection officer, and anyone having to decide and address data protection requirements as the organization migrate or decide to leverage the public cloud for their personal data protection, personal data processing needs, and enable organizations to reap the benefits of cloud computing more effectively with security and privacy enabled by design and by default. So I'm not a lawyer, right? And the purpose of this presentation is really to not provide legal advice at all. So is this presentation focused really on the technical controls required for implementation in terms of compliance with data protection policies and principles, and it doesn't address the legal requirements directly, right? So if you need to look at the legal requirements, do reach out to your legal counsel for advice on the implementation of privacy and data protection requirements and on applicable laws and other requirements relevant to your business. Right, so I'll cover these 4 areas. Following the introduction, we'll take a look at the data privacy landscape, right? And then we'll dive into the areas requiring technical measures, right, for data privacy protection needs, right? And then we will close off with a short concluding remarks. Right, so I intentionally focus these sessions on the public cloud here, as this is the primary cloud model that many organizations are using or migrating over or thinking about using in the near term. Being public doesn't mean that it is paid for by the government using our tax money, and it's not free as well, right? It's public because these are clouds that are in the public internet and accessible by users, by organizations, right, directly by setting up accounts inside there, you know, and you will pay for the service based on the amount of services that you are using, right? So I believe many of you are already familiar with the fundamental benefits of the public clouds itself, right? But there are 2 points that I really want to emphasize. First of all, is the security, right? Some have the perception that the security of the public cloud may not be as good as the on-premises infrastructure, but I like to differ, not just because I work in Amazon Web Services previously, which have an insider look at what is going on up there, right? I think more importantly, you will realize that the cloud actually provides you with a blank sheet, right, where it allows you to design and build security from the ground up. This is not the kind of opportunity you will find in the world of on-premises IT environment anymore, right? From time to time, there may be some new projects, some initiative to replace certain systems, right? But they are partial. They are not something that you can change the entire environment at one go. Right? Even for the year 2000 changes, they were more or less incremental instead of the whole suite of environment being changed. Right? When it's in the cloud itself, you can actually build security iteratively based on your business needs. And then if there is something that doesn't fit well, you can break it down and you can rebuild, redesign. You can change the features and functionality of your security architecture, right, as the business applications requirements evolve or change, right? So you can also use security services that the CSP or third-party vendors provides in the cloud, and you pay as you go, right? There's no need to buy licenses, upfront and wait for the security components or the appliances to get delivered to your data center before you can actually test them, right? In the cloud, you can always open an account and do your testing until you are satisfied with the results. Then you move on to the next stage of your development lifecycle itself. Right, so this is one of the big advantages of security. And the other big advantage is that the public cloud itself, right, provides a whole suite of advanced technologies that in the past itself, only organizations that has a lot of capital to invest are able to have that kind of technologies, resources, and able to try out the new things, right? But when it comes to the cloud now, it creates a low barrier of entry advantage for all organizations of all sizes, right? Whether you are a small, medium, or large company, right? You can capitalize on that advanced technology and do your data processing and deliver better customer experience and better customer satisfaction to meet your business objectives, right? Without the need for substantive upfront IT expenditure. Right, so those are the two key advantages, benefits in the cloud that you don't find on-premise. Of course, there are other advantages like elasticity, flexibility, and all that as well, which we will not spend time to discuss further. Of course, these benefits also come with certain concerns and challenges, right? Developing and operating in the cloud often differ from on-premises environment, in that new systems developments and deployment methodologies will shift towards DevOps and continuous integration, continuous deployment models, right? So these methodologies leverage the elasticity and scalability of the cloud, allows the developers and operators to build, test, and deploy applications in an iterative manner, just like what I mentioned in terms of security, right? They can add, they can change features based on the latest feedback they receive from the user and the management, right? If you don't consider the technical measures that are applicable to security and privacy aspect, right, to implement the right controls for data protection in the DevOps or CI/CD environment, right, organization can easily lose track of personal data that they collect and process in the cloud. And that can result in data exposures and potential breaches as shown in many recent incidents, which we will also talk about later on. So from the perspective of cloud using organization, cloud service providers or CSP, they are also regarded as third parties, right? So from the regulatory perspective, right, CSP are therefore the data processors and duty bound under the data processors' obligations of related regulations. The security and compliance assurance that cloud service provider provides would address those technology layers that they manage. But on the other hand, the cloud users is the data controller who is ultimately responsible and accountable for the security and privacy of the data that they own and control throughout the data lifecycle. The good news is data controller can leverage cloud services to ensure compliance and provide assurance to regulators and their customers or data subjects, the adequacy of their design and implementation. Other data processor or third-party processing data on in the cloud itself for the data controller can also use the cloud services to fulfill their data protection obligations under their data processing agreement or the related data processors obligations under the regulations itself. So the shared responsibility model is something that we normally use to delineate the responsibility between the cloud service provider and the cloud user. So under this model, we therefore have security and privacy of the cloud, which is what CSP is responsible for, and security and privacy in the cloud, which is what cloud user is responsible. So in the context of personal data protection, cloud users should always consider the data lifecycle model, right? So and take a data-centric view by intentionally putting data in the center of the design process and ensure data protection requirements are adequately fulfilled throughout the data lifecycle, from collection to storage, to access and use, then to transfer, share, disclosure, archival, and deletion. We often think about transfer, share, and disclosure with slightly different meaning as well, because the level of controls that the controller have in these three steps are slightly different. When you transfer, it's more of a one-to-one relationship, and you normally establish certain data processing agreement. Sharing also within that kind of context. And normally, again, either the user consent is provided or with certain regulatory or standards compliance requirements met as well. Disclosure also come into that context of either consent or agreement or something like that, right, that are in place with proper approval if need be, that kind of things as well. But disclosure tends to be, you know, something like you publish, right, that you, once you have done it, right, with approval, with agreement, consent whatsoever, you kind of lose control over the data after that, right? Whereas transfer, there are certain obligations the other receiving party will be able to enforce on your behalf, right? So disclosure normally refer to a much broader audience, right? But my interpretation may not be 100% correct, right? So it depends on the legal context in each jurisdiction itself. And again, your legal counsel advice will be important, right? We also need to use this model in our discussion, right? In terms of the technical controls that are applicable when meeting the technical requirements under various privacy laws and principles, right? We will use the data lifecycle model as our template, right, in our analysis and design. So let's, before we dive in on the technical controls, let's have a quick glimpse of the data privacy landscape that we are seeing, right? So in terms of data breaches, right, they are not new, right? We have seen all kinds of data breaches, right, for the last decade and more, right? In fact, the Target incident was one of the earlier one, about 9 over years ago, that was quite massive, and it kind of shocked many people, right, with 110 million records. But over the years, we continue to see this kind of incident happening, right? Hopefully, we are not numb to it, right? But then we get very anxious, right? People start to have more concern over their personal data in terms of what the service provider are doing, and then how are they protecting the data, right? The more recent case that we have seen in the region is the Optus incident last 2 weeks ago, where 10 million records of Australian populations or 40% of Australian population's personal data records were compromised or exposed, right? And the hacker was demanding $1 million ransom, right? But later he changed his mind, right? But this incident has raised a lot of attention of the governments, the regulators, and the industry, right? And as a result, the Australian government is stepping up to fast track their revision of the privacy law, and also other related laws that will have impact on data collection as well. Right. So similarly, we are seeing a lot of countries. They are also changing their or introducing some form of data protection regulations in which particular country itself, right? So within ASEAN itself, ASEAN is actually one of the most fast-growing regions in the world for data protection regulations in the past 10 years. We don't expect to see the pace of change to slow down in 2023 and beyond as well, right? Since 2013, 4 out of 10 ASEAN countries, that includes Singapore, Malaysia, Philippines, and Thailand, have enacted the national privacy law, right? And since then, to meet citizens' growing expectation, this country have been amending the laws or issues currently to address issues, that are most prevailing in the industry itself, right? So till now, we are seeing more development in this area. Like earlier last month, Indonesia government's parliament has passed the data protection bill, and also Vietnam has released the data protection, data privacy implementation decree for their privacy law that was passed several years ago. Right, we'll see more enforcement activity coming up, right? But we see that the trend is that the key enforcement activities has been focusing on security and also the data breach notification, which is now quite a common theme, right, across many regulations requiring reporting within a 72-hour time frame, right? There are also more interest among the regulator to drive greater accountability of the data controller and data processor, right, for privacy enablement, instead of relying on the data subjects, having the data subject understanding what it entails when they are using online services to give consent and all those things, which can be burdensome, and not everyone have the adequate level of knowledge and competency to really provide to ensure that their own personal data are well and adequately protected. Right, so it's more important than ever for data controller and data processor to make sure that they implement the right, the appropriate technical controls, at least at the technical level, to ensure security and privacy of the data that they collect and process. Right, when we look at some of the data breach incidents that are reported, right, there are some common themes. So for example, according to the Verizon's annual data breach incident report, right, the 4 key paths leading to compromising organization networks are basically credential, phishing, exploitation of vulnerabilities, and botnets, right? So these 4 pervades all areas of the data breach incident report, and no organization is safe without a plan to handle them all. Right, so such attacks often result in various forms of system intrusions and data exfiltration and ransomware, which has an upward trend of like more than 13% since increase in 2021 itself. Right, supply chain issues is also another area of wide-ranging consequences. Right, so that we have heightened concern in that area, and another dominant trend is that is responsible for some of these breaches. Most of these breaches are the human errors aspect. They account for like 13% of the breaches that Verizon DBIR has analyzed. Right, and 2 common errors are the misconfiguration and misdelivery, right? Misconfiguration, like for example, having the online storage configured wrongly to become publicly accessible, resulting in massive data breaches. We see this very common in organizations that are new to the cloud, right? And misdelivery are more of a individual, like sending emails to third party and then not realizing that the third party are actually the wrong email address that they are sending to, result in data breaches as well. So in addition to protecting against all these such breaches, there are also inherent privacy concerns across the data lifecycle due to imbalance of power, right, between the data controller and the data subject, right? For example, during the data collection stage, right, as data subject wish to use a service, and the data controller as a service provider may take advantage, right, to collect additional data elements for future use, right, with neither notification nor choices nor consent, right? So such over collection disregards, right, disregards the collection limitation principles and could result in having more data compromise in the case of a breach. Right? The additional data elements may also result in discrimination, manipulations, and lack of autonomy with regards with respect to the interpretation and use of data without knowledge of the data subject. Right? So awareness and compliance with data protection principles are key towards addressing such concerns and preventing the undesirable consequences, including the security aspect and the human awareness aspect as well. So our study across various privacy regulations and frameworks have identified these 17 principles and that organization needs to essentially comply with. So it's pretty long list. Some of them are overlapping, right? Some of them are new, like for example, data residencies and data portability. These are new. These are principles that are getting more popular as a result of their implementation in the EU GDPR. Right? Other countries are also taking up some of these requirements. Right? Breach notification is also becoming something that is quite common with a limited period for reporting, like 72 hours seems to be the norm these days. Right? So across from a data privacy by design perspective, there are actually, if you look from the privacy by design principle, right, there are actually three aspects, right, or areas of controls that are essential. Right? First of all is to minimize data exposure. This relates to this set of data protection principles, and then fulfilling the data subject's rights, obligations, right? Obligation of the data processor and the data controller and the data processor in executing the request from the data subject itself for change of their consent, collection limitation, use limitation, things like that, right? And then transparency. There's a lot more demands on transparency of the data controller, right? So again, these are the three fundamental aspects that we need to take care of when we implement privacy by design and privacy by default. Right? As we mentioned earlier on, there are also common issues, right, that we have seen across all the data breach incidents. And these common issues is really the security safeguard inadequacy, right? And we need this to be across the board. This is an important, very critical area that is needed for data protection. And finally, when we talk about data breach notification, we need to be prepared for incident response, prepared for incident recovery, right, in order for us to be able to meet those requirements and recover from any of the data breach incident more efficiently and effectively as well, and in a secure manner, right? So when we look at from these four areas and the privacy principles requirements, right, we identify a list of controls that are applicable to meet these requirements, right? So there is a total of 27 controls over here. So evaluating them from the data lifecycle perspective, right, we know that, right, some of these controls are applicable only in certain stages of the lifecycle, but some of the controls, right, like data map requirements, data inventory or data map, the continuous oversight, these are applicable across the entire data lifecycle. We'll dive deep into each of these 5 categories in the next few slides. So in terms of minimizing data exposure, there is a saying that you can't protect what you don't know. So similarly, you can't minimize data collection until you know what you have been collecting or have collected, right? So, or what you plan to collect. So you need to have that visibility. So to gain visibility, we need to have a data map or a data inventory, right? So where are the sources and where are the sinks, essentially? So using the data map, then we can identify the data flow in and out of the organizations, right? To do this in the cloud, you can leverage various cloud-related services. Like for example, Amazon, in the Amazon Web Services cloud environment, you have Amazon Macy, which enable automated data discovery and data classification, and Amazon Comprehend to help you identify key privacy-related words and phrases in the data streams and data stores. And then you can do the required filtering and required management of those sensitive data items accordingly. So knowing the data source, data sinks, and data flow, you can also then apply appropriate identity and access control policy using the identity and access or IAM cloud services to manage and control who can access what, including individuals and application roles and resource level access permission, right, and control policy itself. Right, for example, in Amazon, again, you have Cognito, Amazon Cognito or IAM to do identity and access management. And then in the Microsoft Azure environment, they have the Active Directory B2C. In the Google Cloud environment, there is this product called the Firebase. And IBM Cloud, you have IBM Cloud Identity, and so on. So every cloud provider have implemented some form of identity and access management, either to control access to the cloud internal resources or to provide certain identity credential management for their users, be it their customers or their employees as well. Right, so knowing the classification or sensitivity of the different data types, you can then apply the required level of encryption, data encryption, using suitable key management schemes, right, to ensure data confidentiality and integrity protection. So one area that is still emerging is the data privacy preserving encryption technology. And such a technology will enable certain highly sensitive data to be processed without being decrypted, right? So there's no need to decrypt the data, and you can find out results based on what the data that is already encrypted. So at this point, this is still something that various CSP have invested or claim to have invested, right? They have announced investment into the research itself, but yet to have general availability, right? This is the only control that is still in the brewing stage, right? It's still emerging. In any case, most organizations are still concerned with the protection of personal data that are not comparatively less sensitive, right, compared to those that require data privacy preserving encryption technology to meet those requirements. So you can still start without this technology, right? And we can see that this is not far ahead in the near future. They should be available. So another aspect that we need to really pay attention to is fulfilling data subject rights, right? These are obligations of the data controllers, and the data processor will also need to execute based on instruction of the data controller as well, right? So things that are relevant in this, you have like consent monitoring, right? And when the individual exercise their autonomy, right, they request for change in terms of they want to request for access, they want to request for change of their personal data status, for example, or to correct any mistake they found, or they want to change their consent or withdraw their consent or require their data to be deleted or limiting their use. All these requirements you have to cater for, right? This is covered under the individual autonomy aspect, right? And when there are such things that are going on, right, you need to monitor the consent status, right? and implement as part of the data subject request. For example, if there's a change in terms of collection, use, disclosure, or deletion, there is a need to automatically alert the DPO, right, or alert the system owners or other third-party processor when data deletion request has been raised, right? So this kind of automation is something that the crowd is very strong at, right? It provides a lot of capabilities to support this kind of automation. So when you have a web form, right, to allow for the request to be initiated, you can do identity check of the data subject, right? And when that has been validated, then you can actually have the automated notification activated to the various data processor, and to the various data store application to do the correct action itself. And in terms of like data breach notification, you need to alert the DPO, right? Or there's a need to alert the user of certain activities itself, right? Again, notification automation is something you can actually implement in the cloud very easily and very quickly as well. Right, so under certain restriction legislation, right, then legal jurisdiction, there is also a need for data residency compliance, right? So data location selection for your cloud data store and access requirements, all these control can also be implemented in the cloud pretty easily, right? As long as the cloud operating that you are using have data center that operate in those locations that they are supporting. If not, then there are proper data processing agreement or other forms to get approval for the movement of data across certain legal jurisdiction. Right. So this example over here show some form of a kind of a data residence control that can be implemented using for example, the AWS organization. AWS organization is actually a cloud services to organize the many account that the cloud user have within the AWS platform itself, right? They may be using different accounts for different application and different purposes. Right? So with so many accounts, they need to organize it properly by organization unit, for example, right? And then they can do the resource allocation and governance, right? And using the service control policy, right, you can implement certain type of governance, right, that works across the AWS organization service itself, right? It doesn't really grant specific permission, but you can think of it as a guardrail, enforcing limits and boundaries on the actions that can be taken in affected AWS account. So, for example, by default, AWS account can create resources in a particular in any AWS region, right? A region contained of multiple availability zones, and availability zone will contain 2 or more data centers, right? So when you have a region, the region itself have certain resiliency, right? And you create application across region, you get higher resiliency as well, right? So, but when it comes to data residency requirement, you have to constrain the application or the access and the data storage to certain region itself, right? So to enforce these rules, right, of let's say 2 region usage, organization can apply a region deny guardrail, for example, this kind of service control policy that denies any usage outside of the authorized region, right? Except for certain global services that you cannot guardrail, you cannot block, right? The rest you can actually do the control accordingly, right? So the next requirement is providing transparency of processing and assurance, right? So this is to make sure that you are meeting the requirements. You have to be able to prove to the regulators, for example, that you are in compliance. You have to be able to demonstrate to your customers or the data subject that you have been protecting their data adequately, that kind of things, right? So again, you need the data maps, right, to understand what, before you can actually give assurance, you need to know where are your data, you need to know the data flow, right? So data discovery and classification services, as I mentioned earlier on, come into play. And more importantly, you also need continuous monitoring. You need to know what is going on in the environment, right? Who has been assessing what, and then you can collect evidence and be able to demonstrate the compliance level when you are undergoing certain audit or certification assessment, or regulatory inspection or whatever, right? So you need a dashboard to show your compliance status, and you need audit management services to be able to demonstrate, to collect evidence, right? And you need centralized event logging and analysis, right? And again, filtering those identifiable information, personal identifiable information, if those are considered sensitive for certain region to collect and process, right? So again, the cloud itself basically allow you to log every single event, right, that is happening, because everything in the cloud is API driven. So everything can be logged and can be collated. And there are tools like, for example, Amazon Security Hub that allow you to build up a dashboard to understand your compliance status, right? So security safeguards, as I mentioned, is one of the very important and fundamental requirements, right, that you need to implement across the board, right? And this is basic for data protection, right? Even with other things that you are not ready for, you still need to protect the data, right? So as I mentioned, Cloud IAM is one of those service that is commonly available, and is something that you would need to use, right? That you can use to actually implement and protect, ensure who can access what based on your access control policies adequately implemented, right? There are storage and database encryption services that most cloud service provider are providing, right? I think another aspect to consider is also the code aspect, right? So very often we ignore this part. When we do code review, we look for insecure code, but there are also code that can result in privacy leakages, right? When the variables are accessing certain data elements that have personal identifying data, that those variables, if they are not properly managed after use, right? For example, no proper object reuse, no proper memory clearance, that kind of things, it can result in data leakages, right? When the applications are used, right, in the open or in the web, that kind of things as well. So tools like the Amazon code pipelines, they have these code reviews capabilities that able to check for this kind of issues in the code itself. So it's important to look at those capabilities and use them, and it can tighten up the security and privacy of your code. Not just the security aspect, but the privacy aspect as well. And of course, code signing and verifications are something these kind of tools will also provide. And on top of all this, the other very important element is the anti-malware, vulnerability scanning, web application firewalls, all these other network system layer and system layer protections, and as well as a web application layer protection, is something you cannot do without, right? And again, these are services that are already available in the cloud that you can deploy, right? So last but not least is preparation, right? You have to be prepared, right? You have to assume breach, like the Minister of Communication and Information often said, right, in her speech. Right? When you assume breach, it means that what will happen, right? When there is a breach, what will you do, right? So you don't wait until there is a breach, then you think about what you do. You have to do your scenario planning, do your exercise, and be prepared, and look at what are the things you have to do, right, to be prepared. So one of the things, that is really important is before we even deal with any breach, we must be able to detect the breach, right, and be able to discern between false positive and the real positive, right? So having quality incident detection, right, capabilities and notification capabilities are very important. Remember that we only have 72 hours, which is 3 days time frame, right, from discovery to determine the risk involved to the data subject and the impact to the data subjects, data personal privacy, freedom, and safety, right? What will be the implications? If they are considered high risk, then you have to report to the regulators and potentially have to notify the individual concerned as well, right? So to be able to do this well, you need your infrastructure to also be ready, right? So this is another example of how you can do this in the Amazon cloud environment, right? By setting up proper monitoring and notification and detection and notification mechanism inside there, right? So then you get notified at the first instant, and you will be able to respond more effectively in this kind of situation, right? Like for example, using Amazon Guard Duty, which is able to provide continuous threat detection in the cloud and monitor all the service logs and analyze information such as the cloud storage, data events, the cloud network activities, user and API activities, right? And then when it detects signals of potential data breach using AI ML technology, right? Like for example, such as a sudden surge of data transfer under the server instances, right? Or finding unusual traffic volume, right? So it will automatically report on such changes, and then you can respond accordingly. And this will be visible on the security hub itself, right? With integration of AWS services, you can automatically alert by SMS, email, or even your Slack channel or other collaboration tools, right? And use things like Lambda, to automate the remediation step if those are known issues that can be remediated immediately, right? So this kind of solution will make sure that you have low false positive, and then able to also use the advanced technology like machine learning, to help in the detection process itself. Right. So to conclude, we are in a time of many changes in the privacy arena. The increasing number and volumes of data breaches are raising a high anxiety, right, among individuals and organizations. Individuals are facing tremendous challenge, right, to ensure their privacy online, and regulators are also stepping up in their response, right, in terms of enforcement, passing the laws and changing the laws to have requiring tighter controls and so on. Organizations are therefore faced with more challenges, right, when they try to meet the business goals and at the same time to remain compliant. The public cloud with its low barrier of entry is where businesses are migrating to if they are not already leveraging to move faster and deliver better customers experience. So our analysis has shown the importance of security and automation in data protection. They are essential for defending against privacy threats and ensuring compliance and enabling business objectives. So with the shared responsibility models in place, right, the CSP is really the new back office. It is important to ensure CSP compliance as data processor. But more importantly, organizations as data controllers needs to focus on data protection in the cloud itself. Right? So as data controller because data controller is ultimately accountable for the security and privacy of personal data, right, be it in the cloud or on premises. Right? The set of technical controls in the 5 key areas that I have just shared have in this presentation basically provide a basic framework for organization to design, build, and implement its privacy and security by design strategy in the cloud itself. Right? So you must not forget about other legal requirements itself. They are not technical, but they are still legal. Right? So you have to consult accordingly to make sure they are in place. Right? So technical is only one aspect. right? So there are all these policy matters that you also need to address, right? With that, I conclude my presentation. So if you need to, if you have any feedback or question, feel free to reach out to me via LinkedIn, right? So this QR code is to my LinkedIn account, right? We can always connect over there, and also visit my blog site for other things that I have, other things that I have posted over there, opinions and so on and so forth. Right? Thank you very much.